Hello, Shannon Crane here, and you're listening to the Spotlight series presented to you by the Population Studies Center at the University of Pennsylvania. In this installment, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jere R. Behrman and Irma T. Elo. Jere Behrman is the William R. Kenan Jr. Professor of Economics and Professor of Sociology, and Irma Elo is the Associate Director for the Population Aging Research Center. She is also the Chair of Sociology here at Penn. In this spotlight, I spoke with Jere and Irma about a longitudinal data aging project in Chile that aims to assess cognition in elderly populations. This global and collaborative project is a fascinating example of why it takes a village to do demographic and aging research. So adjust your volume and enjoy the interview. Does one of you want to tell me a little bit about your research project in Chile?
So since you're the PI, why don't you take the lead?
Yeah, so we studied this project. It's we're working with a group at the Catholic University of Chile, who are long-term collaborators of Jere's on something called the Chilean Social Protection Survey. Mm-hmm. Which is a longitudinal data set that began in 2002 and has had repeated interviews. So the project we're working with them on now took advantage of the fact that it has longitudinal data. And we had an opportunity to apply for funding from the National Institute of Aging for our Population Aging Research Center supplement, as a supplement to our Aging Research Center on projects related to cognition. So we decided that we would try to implement or collect data using something called the Harmonized Cognitive Assessment Protocol. Mm-hmm. That was developed by the team at the Health and Retirement Study. That's being it's really to assess cognition among the elderly. Mm-hmm. And it was it has been implemented in the United States, England, Mexico, China, mm-hmm. and India, I believe now. And so we thought that the Chilean data or that population would be also very interesting for this particular age gap, what it's called. Mm-hmm. In part because Chile is very different, more developed than Mexico, but it's also another Latin American country mm-hmm. that has gone through very rapid transition from sort of middle income country to a high income country. Over mm-hmm. the period in which the elderly population has aged.
Okay.
And aged very rapidly.
And the Chilean mm-hmm. population is aging very rapidly. Mm-hmm. So we were successful in getting the resources to work with David Bravo, mm-hmm. And his team to implement this protocol. Mm-hmm. And it's now in the field.
Cool.
So we don't have any results yet, but...
So it's a part of the survey?
Yeah, it's implemented to the 60-plus population of the Chilean Social Protection Survey. Mm-hmm. This particular age group also received a survey in 2017 that did an extensive interview with them about health conditions, well-being, mm-hmm. social support. Mm-hmm. So we have other additional data that's not in the regular longitudinal survey.
Nice.
You want to add something, Jere?
Yeah. So we're interested in these HCAP data, and an important part is making comparisons with the other countries, but particularly Mexico, mm-hmm. And I suppose the U.S. Regarding these data. Mm-hmm. But from the 2015 data, we do have information about the cognitive status of Chileans over 60 years of age, as measured by something called a mini mental test, which has been widely used. It's actually part of HCAP.
HCAP also.
And so while we're waiting for the new data to come in, we have been working with two graduate students, one in demography, one in economics, to understand those data better, to see, for example, how well one's education predicts how one does on a mini mental test. The education course occurred for most people when they were, it ended when they were in their teens or maybe their 20s. And for people over 60, that was a long time ago. That was 40, 50 years ago. And seeing if, even given the effects of your own education, there are effects of parents' education. So we are able to do some interesting work before we get the HCAP results, but we'll be able to do much more with the HCAP results.
But the nice thing about the Chilean survey is that in addition to education, which is the focus of the research we do now, we can also look at other aspects like work environment, sort of life course processes that we can measure over time for these individuals.
Gotcha.
And the fact that the data also collects this childhood socioeconomic status and parents' education information, which is similar to what HRS and MHAS does as well. So education is known to be related to later life cognition in the United States and in many other countries. So this allows us to see to what extent that holds true in Chile.
Sounds
and
like
whether
you
there are
have
independent influences of childhood and adult. Well, adult, your own education, but also your parental education.
It definitely sounds like you have a data set that is very broad and reaching, and you guys can collect a lot about people and the population there.
Chilean Social Protection Survey, this is a data that's been supported by the Chilean government.
Right.
So that the funding for that longitudinal aspect of this data comes from the Chilean government.
Gotcha. Cool. That's great.
Primarily, but actually part of the Population Studies Center were involved in the early stages. And we had a grant from NIA for which Patriot Todd was the primary person I was involved with. This is before Irma got involved. Beth Soto was involved. And that helped lay the foundation for the Social Protection Survey in a way that was positive in part because we build a lot on the HRS and MHAS. We keep referring to MHAS, but
The Mexican Health and Aging Study.
Okay.
Aging study. Yeah.
Aging study. Okay,
Right.
Gotcha. Interesting. I think that this collaboration, and obviously you were a part of kind of the early stages of this project, makes it unique in a way and special. But I just wanted to quickly ask, when you say a population is rapidly aging, can you paint a more demographic, scaled up picture of what that looks like?
So in 1990, this is depending on Jere's memory, but in 1990, 6% of Chileans were over 65 years of age. In 2015, that had doubled, so it was 12%.
Okay.
That's a rapid change. For the U.S. in 1990, I think it was 15%. I don't remember in 2015 what it is for the U.S., but in the quarter century from 1990 to 2015, Chile went from having 40% as large a share of its population over 65 as did the U.S. at the time, to almost having as much. It's a big change.
Interesting. And what are the conditions of life, or I guess a population, that would lead to that type of situation? I know that it's life expectancy is definitely a word that's been coming up.
There's also fertility decline.
And fertility decline.
Yeah, so the big
driver, I think, is fertility decline.
The big question, I think empirically, is the fertility decline. And Chile, like many countries in the world, has had a large fertility decline well after the U.S. and European countries, but Chile before many developing countries. Although there's exceptions to that statement, China would be a huge one. But life expectancy is also important, and Chilean life expectancy is a little higher than U.S. life expectancy.
Mm-hmm.
And in that quarter century between 1990 and 2015, the Chilean life expectancy at the start of that period was less than the U.S., and in that period it now exceeds U.S. It's basically, as in so many things in life expectancy, the women that are driving this. In the sense, the life expectancies are higher for women, but also there was a crossing of the patterns for men, for Chilean women versus U.S. women during this period of time. For men in Chile are about like U.S. men in life expectancy.
Yeah, I don't know exactly though. But of course, U.S. does poorly in life expectancy relative to other high-income countries. And Chile does well.
Yeah. So I know that you've worked in kind of doing geographical scales of different projects. I know that you're involved in a project that has to do with the geography of life. Is it geography of mortality in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's geographic inequalities in mortality in the U.S.
So does geography have play a part in this survey and in this study in Chile?
Well, it's nationally representative survey.
Yeah. So yes.
So I'm sure that whether there will be differences between urban and rural areas, time will tell. We don't know at this point.
Right. Yeah. Cool. That's
but
great.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But it's a different kind of. It's very different than the U.S. in the sense that the population is very concentrated in the Santiago metropolitan area. So there's one metropolitan area that has over 40% of the country's population.
Wow.
In the U.S., I don't know what New York City has, but 6% or something like that.
And Chile is a very narrow, long country, so it's very different in many ways, right?
Right. Yeah. I would imagine there are quite a few different geographies to navigate there.
It's a very interesting country, and it's also become a high-income country. I'm not sure in which year it reached that status, but it's gone through a development during the life of these individuals who we are studying now.
Definitely.
But I also want to say that we're working also very closely with Rebecca Wong, who is the PI of the Mexican Health and Aging Study. And also, obviously, talking with David Weir at the HRS and others. So, we'll be sharing our experience in Chile with the broader group of researchers who are implementing the age gap in other parts of the world.
You guys have MHAS, HRS, You have the university
Charles.
in Chile. You have the
Charles.
government in Chile.
Charles,
The
which
PSC,
is
the park.
yeah, and
a
Charles
lot of
is the
collaborators.
Chinese health. Charles, it's the Chinese HRS equivalent,
Okay.
and Lassie is the longitudinal study of aging in India.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Jinko Klee is involved in that. So there are large group of researchers who are working on these topics.
What can you, I mean, other than at the end having this like large community of people with whom you can review this data and kind of pull support from, I assume, what is another benefit to having such a large group of collaborators and having people from all different countries in the world who have expertise in this kind of
Well,
survey?
it's really to try to find out whether we can collect comparable data across countries with very different levels of development, educational attainment of the population, well-being.
But comparative data particularly related to cognitive
Cognitive aging.
of aging.
Because all countries are going to be faced with growing elderly population. Even if it's not growing as a proportion of the population, it's growing rapidly in the number of people.
Right.
And so...
And that will
And
pose its own problem.
I don't know if I can think of an exception in terms of the proportion of the population, actually.
I'm sure it's increasing everywhere, but it still might be like in India, it still may be small proportion.
It's a small proportion,
But it's
a
large
rapidly
numbers of
increasing.
people.
Right.
Large numbers of people.
Right.
In
So,
Malawi, it's increasing very rapidly. It's just
right.
from very low
It's-
base.
Right, exactly. But the numbers of individuals is huge, and as people live longer, and cognitive aging becomes a very important issue.
Which I can also imagine might be a difficult problem or set of circumstances to address as like a government or an institution, 50 years from now, when you have a much larger proportion and a greater population.
Well, that's why I think these projects is trying to understand how we even measure. Because measurement itself is difficult in some ways, and that's what this bigger project that's funded by National Institutes of Aging is really trying to see, whether there are
And
comparable ways of asking questions.
governments vary in how active or proactive they have been in regard to aging, or in particular in regard to cognitive decline or dementias. But the Chilean government does have a national plan for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, which is another reason it's a particularly interesting country to look at.
So there's a
Because
plan.
the country itself is interested, I think, in the findings.
So you two were both there this summer, correct?
We were there.
We were there this winter and this summer.
And the winter and the summer.
In
Okay.
January and in July.
Gotcha.
January and July, August.
So in January it was summer in Chile,
Yes.
and then
Correct.
in July it was
It was
winter in
winter.
Chile. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I
Can
get
you talk
confused.
a little bit about that experience of being there? And I know I saw a photo of you guys with your collaborators from the university. I'm just curious.
Well, when
about
we went in January, David Weir from HRS came with us, and to talk with David, and also with the subsecretariat in the government agency that funds the Chilean Social Protection Survey.
It's in the Social Security part of the government that has funded most of the survey historically.
Gotcha.
So we had meetings with them to talk about the age gap and why we're doing it and how we plan to do it. This summer we were there during the training for the field work.
Oh, how was that?
It was very interesting, actually. I'm very happy we went. And there was also a collaborator of Rebecca Wong, Sylvia.
The trouble is we know Sylvia on her first name basis.
Yeah, Sylvia, yes.
I
She
remember
was
that.
there. She was doing the training.
Okay.
She was helping the Chileans to do the training, so we had an opportunity to overlap with her, which was very nice as well.
What was your experience in working or speaking with? Did you guys like talk to the surveyors and people who are getting trained for field work? And what was that?
Well, we went to observe the training of the interviewers.
Okay.
And it was I think it was helpful for us to see how, about the questions, how the questions I ask, how the people react. We talked a lot with Sylvia, we talked a lot with David and his staff who were going to be supervising the field work. We did not spend so much time with interviewers themselves.
Cool. I mean, that's very cool. Sometimes I feel like it's good to have the kind of boots on the ground perspective of
No, I
these
think it's
large
important.
scale surveys and studies too.
No, I think it's very important actually.
Yeah.
But we also had an opportunity to visit with our former students.
Oh, really? Which former students?
Alejandra.
Oh, nice.
Alejandra now works at the Catholic University of Chile.
Awesome.
And Elena Castanheira,
Mm-hmm.
and she works with the UN in the regional office, CEPAL.
Sepal.
CEPAL.
I'm going to call it Sepal.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I know where. Yeah. I think I
Yeah.
read
So
about that.
we, in January, I spent a weekend with them. They were showing me Chile, in Santiago and on the coast.
That sounds lovely.
It was great. It was great. And then they were very nice. They were very generous. And then this time we had some meetings with Alejandra about work, and then had nice dinner with them, both of them, in Santiago.
That sounds like a lovely, very productive kind of like work and play at the same time.
But also connecting with our students, with the former students. Of course,
Yeah.
they're not students anymore, now they're professionals. Which was very nice.
Yeah,
It's
that's
nice
wonderful.
to see our graduates do well.
Yes, I can imagine. It must feel very good to see that. So I have a question about all of this data, and I know that we don't have it yet, it's not complete. But for the project, is there a plan for how an interested person can access such data, or is that maybe down the road a little ways?
Well, I think it's down the road a little ways, but the social protection survey is available, the longitudinal survey,
Oh, on the web.
on the website on the
great.
government website in Chile, not the age gap, and that will eventually have to be made available. But, we'll have to first see it, clean it,
Gotcha.
look
Yeah.
at it.
Look at it first.
Yeah, but the other data, the longitudinal data are available online.
Wonderful. We can link out to that too. Yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Have you had any surprises or challenges
Lots
with
of them.
regards? Lots of them.
Lots of challenges associated with surprises. There are many pluses of working with a government, including the Chilean government. As Irma emphasized, they provided basically all the resources for collecting these
Longitudinal.
6 rounds of data on 20,000 people, which would take many NIH grants to fund. And so there's a lot of pluses, and it means we're also well plugged in to the government that may affect policy. Our collaborator, David Bravo, has been very influential in policy relating to aging, particularly pension systems in Chile. But dealing with the government has its downside too, and there are times when things unexpectedly happen or something happens that has nothing to do with the project, which diverts the attention of the key people in the government entirely away. So we originally were hoping at starting data collection in November or December last year. It actually started in August this year.
Okay.
And there were hiccups along the way. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? But the good news is, as Irma said,
Finally it happened.
we're roughly halfway through the data collection now. And I think Irma agrees, have good relations with the various people in the government, which means whatever we do will have more influence than if we were just doing it on our own.
Right.
But the challenges and surprises, I think, all had to do with delays along the way that were unanticipated and little surprises. The way I think this is in some ways already a very successful project and very promising, and it I think benefited. Both Irma and I brought a lot to this project, and it wouldn't have happened with just one of us. You know, I have this long history with Chile, good relations with David, relations with many people in the government, etc. Irma bought being very much better than I, at least, plugged in to relevant people at NIA, a close relationship with Rebecca Wong, which was important, with David Weir, with various people in the broader aging community, and has been very persuasive. There's been challenges there too. There's persuasive in dealing with these people, which has made the project, possible. So.
Well, it definitely sounds like good things come to those who wait, and it just takes a little bit of patience.
Well, I think
there.
Jere and I are good collaborators. I think we complement each other, right?
Yeah.
He's most of the time. We
I
don't
think
always agree. We don't always agree, but it's
Yeah.
okay.
But
I
I
mean,
think that's
we can
part of
resolve
what
all.
makes it work.
Yeah.
You can't always agree about everything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in some sense, we've never worked together on a formal study before, but Irma was director of Park. I was associate director, and I think we worked together quite well in that role. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah, well, we know enough about each other, so.
I'm not surprised either. And it really sounds like it's going to be a very fruitful
We hope.
study. And I am very excited to hear about these data and any results. And yeah, I'm excited. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Thank
Great.
you guys
Yeah.
so much for talking with me today. And
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. I'm excited to have learned more about the project too.